Hello everybody, this is going to be the first video in a series of videos where I go through and give my thoughts on all of the cards in one step from Eden. The way I'm going to structure this is every video is going to be covering a different focus in the game and go through all the cards from that focus. This video is going to be going through cards from Anima, and basically I'm just going to go through, tell you guys when I think you should pick these cards, how good are these cards, what kind of synergies are you looking for with them, that kind of stuff, and just a general overview of which cards are good, which cards are not so great, which are just average, etc. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to do this video on Anima, which is the first focus, and we're just going to go down the list here. So the first card from Anima is Backburner, and this spell is not so great for the same reason there are a lot of spells that are not so great, because it's detrimental to you when you use it. So you're going to throw this Backburner out, and it's going to cover a quarter of the enemy field in flames, do 60 damage. That's great for 1 mana, but it's doing the same thing to your side of the field. So that's not that great. And it's a quarter of your field that's going to be lit up. I personally never really take Backburner. I've tried it a few times. Every time it's done more harm than good, because the downside is just so crushing on it. So you can take it. I really don't recommend it though. If you're just looking for cards that are gonna serve you well, this is not one of those. Stay away from Backburner. The next card we have is Blizzard, and I'm gonna take Blizzard here as an opportunity to talk about something that happens with really expensive spells in this game. So really expensive spells are almost never as efficient as just spending 5 mana to cast 2 smaller spells. Like the 2 or 3 smaller spells, or however many, is almost always going to do more damage than the 1 big spell. But here's the thing. With really big expensive spells here like Blizzard, when you upgrade this, the upgrade on Blizzard is going to be more impactful, because it's kind of like all 5 of that mana you're spending is benefiting from this one upgrade. So if you get double cast on one of these huge expensive spells, then it's much better than putting double cast on something like a 1-cost spell most of the time. Same with stuff like Restore half mana cost. That's way better on a 5 mana spell than a 2 mana spell or whatever. Mostly the upgrades work this way. There are a few that are a bit better on really cheap spells like plus shield and stuff like that, but that's generally how these expensive spells work, and that's the strength they have. So Blizzard, on average, is going to be hitting each enemy on the enemy field 3 times, which is going to be 30 damage, plus 1 proc of Frost, which is another 150 damage, so 180 damage total. For 5 mana, that's not great, but what you have to keep in mind here is that Frost is one of the most heavily supported archetypes in the game, so odds are you're going to have something that's really boosting this Blizzard up. Like maybe you have the Chocomin chip and it's slowing everything down all the time while Blizzard's landing, or you have the Tundra boots, which are going to root enemies, or freezing stuff refunds mana, or whatever. There's just tons of relics that work with Frost. However, that being said, Blizzard is the kind of card you take when you're already pretty deep into a Frost build. If you're just really late in the game and you see this card and you have 5 mana, but nothing you're trying to do has anything to do with Frost, I would not recommend it, because for 5 mana by itself with no synergies to back it up, Blizzard isn't that great. So if you're already deep in Frost, take it. If you're not, stay away from it. Brushfire. This is kind of a weird one because it's paying you off for having a lot of fire, but all it's doing is giving you more fire. But for this to actually work, you need to already have a decent number of cards that are making fire. And at that point, it's kind of questionable how good this is. It's not terrible in a flame deck, don't get me wrong. Like, 1 mana for this effect isn't a bad deal, but it's just kind of underwhelming is the thing. On top of that, it kinda doesn't do anything if you don't already have the stuff to back it up. So, if you're not in a flame deck, this is just awful. If you are in a flame deck, this is mediocre at best, because it just doesn't do enough. This is the kind of card I would never take over another card that's kind of even semi-impactful, because it just doesn't do enough, even though it costs 1 mana. So, you can take it. It's not the worst thing ever, but don't expect it to do anything spectacular. Carpet Bomb. This is a great card to take if you're trying to destroy any chance you ever had of winning the run. So, this card is just awful. It is unbelievably awful. It's even worse because of the fact that it's actually more detrimental to you than it is harmful to the enemies, because it applies Fragile to you for some reason. So, you apply Fragile to yourself, then you have this huge nuke coming your way that you need to dodge, and it leaves flames all over your side of the field in random places that you might pretty much inevitably step on. It's not what you want to be doing. It's big and flashy, but ultimately it's just not very good. And the payoff is what? You're doing probably 40 damage and leaving flames in a whole bunch of random places that the enemies might not even be standing in. And you have to spend 3 mana on this thing. 3 mana isn't a small amount of mana, that's a lot of mana. So, I can't really imagine any situations where you would actively want this card, and I can't even think of anything you could do to build around it that would make it not terrible. So, kind of like Backburner, this is another one that you just want to stay away from. It's just way too risky. Cold Medicine. This card is pretty powerful in my opinion. It heals them for 40, sure, but you're applying 2 Frost. 2 Frost, assuming you get the proc off, is going to be 100 damage plus whatever synergies you have going on with Frost. So you're getting 60 damage total out of this thing for 0 mana. That's a pretty solid deal. It's comparable to Mini Thunder, which is somewhere down here. Yeah, it's comparable to Mini Thunder, but it does way more damage, and it has actual synergies going on, whereas Mini Thunder is just kind of there. It doesn't really synergize with anything. So, Cold Medicine is a great card if you already have a Frost build, and I think it's also good enough to take by itself early on and speculate on a Frost build. Like, this is the kind of card that I'll see in my first pick, and it'll make me think, maybe I should take that and start leaning towards Frost, because Cold Medicine is just such a strong card. So I definitely think very highly of Cold Medicine, as I'm sure you can tell, and I tend to pick it quite often. So far, it's probably the strongest card we've looked at. Cold Snap. This one is the kind of card you take and you actively look for if you're already in a Frost build. But unlike Cold Medicine, I would not take this if I'm not already in a Frost build, because it doesn't apply enough Frost by itself. With Cold Medicine, you can hit an enemy twice with it and get the proc, and then the third time you hit them with it, you get the proc again. With Cold Snap, you have to cast this thing 3 times by itself just to get the frost damage to go off. Now, if you're trying to force a Frost build, and this just happens to be the first Frost card that shows up, sure, go ahead and take it. But if you're not already in a Frost build and you're still open to what you're trying to build, I wouldn't take Cold Snap. It's definitely great in a Frost build, take it there, but outside of that, I would hesitate a bit. Combust. Combust is what Brushfire wishes it was. Combust is like the real payoff for going fire. So there's kind of a build where you combine this with Firewall and remove everything else from the deck, and you just put Firewalls down and use Combust to refresh them, and then the whole enemy field's on fire, and that's kind of neat, but it's not the most powerful thing you can be doing. However, if you have a decent amount of flame going on, I would consider Combust, because 1 mana for 150 damage is already a gargantuan rate. Like, that's incredible. And then we refresh the flames, so they take even more damage from the flames because they're going to be there for way longer. And if you have enough fire, you can eventually fill out the whole enemy field with fire and then just keep refreshing it with Combust. That being said, of course, if you're not already there, I wouldn't speculate on Combust. Take this after you already have the stuff to make it work, not before. But once you have the stuff to make it work, definitely go for it. Rio Kinesis. This is another very powerful card that will push me towards going into a Frost build. It's doing, assuming you get the Frost proc, it's doing 200 damage for 2 mana. That's an incredible rate. And 2 mana for 100 damage the first time and 200 damage the second time, that's a pretty decent rate too. Like, if you're not sure what you're trying to do with your build, pretty much take this all the same time as you take Cold Medicine. It's pretty comparable. Take it in all the same situations. If you're already in Frost, definitely take it. If you don't know what you're trying to build, I would take it too, because it's a pretty good reason to go into Frost. Ember. This one is okay. It's kind of a low impact spell, but it only costs 0. The obvious comparison to it is going to be Mini Thunder again. I think it's significantly better than Mini Thunder just because it actually synergizes stuff. So it's kind of low impact, right? So it's definitely not offensive to take, but if you're already in a dedicated strategy that's not fire, I don't know if I would want to gunk up the deck with Ember, because it just adds that mental overhead that you might not want to deal with. And that's kind of a theme with all these free spells that we're going to see. They add mental overhead if you're not, if they don't synergize with anything you're trying to do. So generally, I only take them if they have synergies with what I'm trying to do, or they really push me towards a specific strategy. Like, if I have no idea what I'm trying to build, unlike Cold Medicine, Ember is not going to push me towards going into flame-based strategy, because it's just not impactful enough. And it's a bit finicky, because they have to actually stand in the fire, and it's only one tile of fire. So, whether or not you take it is up to you, really. You can take it or leave it most of the time, and it won't be terribly offensive. It might just clog up the deck a little bit. Explosion. Okay, so here we have our first Calamity, and this one really is something. So Explosion is the kind of card that exists for the sole purpose of comboing it with switch baits. Now, if you don't have switch bait, then for the love of God, don't take Explosion, because actually casting this card is a terrible idea. If you do have switch bait, then definitely take Explosion, and you can build a whole deck out of that. But actually hard casting Explosion is just too risky, because standing there for 3 seconds, charge up this huge thing, and then if it doesn't kill everything on the screen, you're standing there for another 4 seconds, and in that time, odds are you're getting hit. So, anchoring yourself is already kind of not the best, but doing it for 7 seconds is a death sentence a lot of time. Take this if you're looking to combo with switch bait, but if that's not what you're trying to do, stay far away from this card. Bolvider. This one kind of falls into the category of calamities that aren't that exciting, but they're just really good. Whereas Explosion is in the category of calamities that are kind of awful, but really big and flashy. So this card is an absolute powerhouse. For 4 mana, over the course of 6 seconds, you're going to be dealing 300 damage to every enemy on the field, and getting whatever Frost payoff artifacts you have to proc 2 times off this thing. It's crazy powerful. Like, even if you're not in a Frost build, this might be worth considering, because just 4 mana to do 300 to everything on the field with no downsides. Like, you don't have to aim it, you don't have to think about nothing, you just cast the spell and boom, 300 damage over a few seconds. This is the kind of spell that's kinda really powerful by itself, but if you have the synergies to go with it, it's just back-breaking for the enemies. So there are very few situations where I wouldn't take Convolvitor, especially because it consumes. If it didn't consume, it would just be absurd. However, because it does consume, that means we can put it pretty much anywhere, and it won't be problematic, because since it consumes, if you're running some kind of big 2-card combo that's really important to your strategy, you cast a Convolvitor once, and then it's gone, and you can just use your combo. So there are very few situations where I would not take this, and I think it's kind of pushed on its power level, if I'm being honest. Firestorm. This card's okay. I'm sure we can do the math on how much of the field it's going to cover on average. It's shooting 12 times total, but that doesn't mean it's hitting 12 different tiles. So hitting 12 different tiles is like the high roll. So honestly, this is going to be kind of the same thing as Blizzard, but to a lesser extent. Because the damage this can do is largely dependent on how good your fire synergies are. If you don't have good synergy with flames, it's gonna pull its weight fine, but don't expect too much out of it. If you do have synergies with flames, I still don't know if I would take this, to be honest, because, and oftentimes when I'm running flames builds, I don't, now that I think about it, because it's just too inconsistent. Like, I really need the flames to be where I need them to be. Firestorm just throws them all over the place, and I have no idea if they're going to be in a good spot or not. And for 4 mana, that kind of inconsistency is just not what I really want. Now, the other thing with flames is they have diminishing returns. The more flames cards you have in your deck, the worse they get, because once a tile's on fire, it's on fire already. Like, you can't double fire it, you can just refresh the duration. So Firestorm falls into kind of this weird spot where you would want to take it after you have a lot of payoffs for the fire already, but if you're at that point, it's much worse, because at that point you already probably have all the fire cards you need to make the payoffs worth it, so you don't need the Firestorm anymore at that point. So I think this card's probably, I mean, it's okay, it's not going to ruin your deck, but for 4 mana, I just don't know if this effect's worth it. Firewall. Okay, so this card is pretty great. Firewall just does what it needs to do perfectly. One whole column of flame is usually the kind of thing you need to deal with bosses. Like, against Gunner, you put this in the back row, because that's where he spends most of his time. And you're going to find a lot of stuff that simulates that with a lot of other bosses as well as a lot of room fights. A lot of enemies just like to move up and down and up and down and up and down. And a column of fire is just going to wreck those enemies, because they're never going to be able to move out of it. It's only 2 mana as well, and 40 damage is okay, I guess. It's not what you're coming for. This card is obviously very powerful in the flame deck, but even if you're not running a flame deck or trying to lean that way, I'd still take Flame Wall a lot of time. Because it's just a powerful card by itself. It does what it needs to do very well. And it's especially powerful against the wall. Like, it obliterates the wall. So even if you're not running a flame build, this is the kind of card I would recommend taking, because it's very strong standalone. Barrage. 2 mana for her damage and flames behind target. This is the kind of card I don't really take very often, because it's not very good on bosses. When I use a flame card, I want the flames to be on the tile where the enemy is, not behind them. against bosses, this is like 2 mana for 10 damage, and then it puts flames on tiles that they're for sure not standing on at the moment. And you're just kind of hoping for them to move back there. It's not the kind of card I would recommend. It's just too unreliable, kind of finicky. It's okay for room fights, I guess, but then you need the enemies to be standing in a specific formation. I'd rather just have a card like Firewall, where I can put the flames right on top of the enemy and they're in a better formation in the first place. Frost Barrage. Okay, this card is a bit more complex than it seems on the surface. So, the way this works is if you're standing in one of the middle 2 rows, it'll shoot 3 Frost Bolts in 3 different rows. But if you're standing in the top or bottom row, it'll shoot 2 Frost Bolts in the row you're standing in, and 1 in the row just above or just below you. So if you use this right, you can get one enemy with 2 Frost Bolts, and at that point you're doing 80 damage and applying 2 frosts, so that's pretty comparable to Rio Kinesis. And the other mode, where you fire them in 3 separate rows, can also be pretty useful because it pretty much guarantees they're going to hit whatever you're trying to hit. They're not going to dodge it, unlike Rio Kinesis, which does have to charge and it can be a bit of a pain to actually hit. This is going to hit most of the time, unless something really crazy happens. And on top of that, it can hit more than one thing. Like, this is an AoE spell as well. So, I kind of lumped this into the same category as Cold Medicine and Rio Kinesis, where it's spectacular if you're already in a Frost build, and if you're not already in a Frost build, it's a reason to move towards Frost build. Alright. Frostbite. This is okay. It's okay, it's not the greatest thing ever. It can be a bit of a pain to hit because, unlike Mini Thunder or Ember, it has some travel time associated with it. The fragile condition is something you're pretty much only ever going to achieve on Violet. And if you do get that to work, then this card is absolutely broken. But most of the time, that's not going to be the case. See, if you're not getting the fragile synergy going with it, then I don't know if this is worth a card slot, even in a Frost build, because most of the Air Frost cards just do the job way better. This thing's kinda difficult to hit a lot of the time, and it just isn't impactful enough for how hard it is to use properly. That's something you're gonna notice with a lot of these 0 mana spells. They're very hard to make useful. If sure, they're free, but a lot of time they're just not worth the trouble. And that's a theme we're gonna be seeing with quite a few 0 mana cards going forward. Raus Bolts, the bog standard crossbow. This one is a card that doesn't really impress me a whole lot. It's not going to push you towards going a Frost build because it's just not terribly impactful. And if you're already in a Frost build, then odds are this is going to end up being one of your worst Frost cards, because again, it's just not very impactful. So if you're not in a Frost build, I would stay away from this. But if you're already in a Frost build, or you have some very good reason to go towards a Frost build, then you can take it or leave it. If you take it, it's not going to be terribly disappointing. Like, it's not the end of the world. There are way worse things you can take. But if you don't take it, you're probably not going to miss it. Elle Storm. Okay, so the obvious comparison here is going to be to Blizzard. Except, compared to Blizzard, this one's only shooting 18 shots. And only costs 1 less mana. So this is shooting almost... Well, let me restate that. Blizzard's shooting almost 3 times as much as Hailstorm is over a longer duration, and only costs 1 more mana. On average, Hailstorm is only going to be about as good as Cold Snap, which is really disappointing. It's a card that looks good on paper, but when you really do the math and you really use it a lot, believe me, I've used this card a lot, and every time it's just kind of disappointing. The effect... The real problem is when you put this next to Cold Snap and Blizzard. When you put these 3 cards side by side, the Hailstorm just sticks out like a sore thumb as the card that's just way worse than these other 2 cards. You can take this in a Frost build, but a lot of times it's just not going to pull its weight. And definitely don't ever pick this if you're not already having all that Frost support you need for this. Ice Hockey. This is a fun one. It's one of the cards that kind of demands you already know what you're doing to make it decent. Like, if you're new to a game, you're going to pick this and you're just going to throw it out there and you're going to have no idea what it's going to hit or whether it's going to hit or how many times it's going to hit. But if you're pretty experienced with the game and you've already had some practice using Ice Hockey or other Diag Beam effects, then this thing is kind of absurd. For 3 mana, it can potentially proc Frost all by itself. So it has a very high ceiling for what it can do, but the floor is 0. Like, if you don't know how to use this and utilize it, it's very possible it could do absolutely nothing for you. So, generally, if you're new to the game and you're still just trying to figure stuff out, I'd stay away from this card. If you're pretty experienced and you're looking for some Frost Synergy stuff, it's going to help you out in that department. This is a great pickup. Ice Needle. This card is very, very good. It's kind of in that same category as Frost Barrage, Rio Kinesis, and Cold Medicine, except better. Like, it's better than all those cards. Because for 2 mana, you're applying 2 Frost to everything in the row, and you're applying the Frost twice, so it actually makes the Choco Mint chip last longer than it would for stuff that only applies Frost 1 time. And since it hits twice, it gets more benefit out of a few upgrades, but those aren't really a huge deal. this card is probably most comparable to Frost Barrage if you're using Frost Barrage on the top or bottom row. And I'd say it's a fair bit stronger than Frost Barrage, Rio Kinesis, Combust, and so the same as with those, if you're already in Frost, definitely take this. If you don't know what you're doing and you see this, definitely consider going Frost. Ice Spikes. This one can be a bit finicky. It's definitely not as strong as the 4 cards here, Combust and Rio Kinesis, Frost Barrage, and Ice Needle, but it's serviceable. Like, you can do good things with this card, but it's just a little less reliable than a lot of this other stuff. And if you're just looking for more Frost, then go for it. If you're not already there, I wouldn't bother. Mini Thunder. Oh boy. This is like the poster child for cards that are pretty inoffensive, but they just don't really do anything. For this to work, you need to get in a position where you're exactly 4 tiles away from the target, and then the payoff is 40 damage. It's not a terrible card. Like, you're never gonna feel awful for taking it, but ultimately it just doesn't do a whole lot. It just it's just kind of there, just using it as filler, really. If this came with a upgrade already on it that made it consume and give me like max HP or something like that, then sure, I'll take it. But other than that, it just clutters the deck a bit. Ultimately, the clutter isn't really worth the very minuscule reward you get out of this, in my opinion. Okay, Fire. Okay. This is just okay. It's a card that both Pyroterra and Gunner start with, and really I would recommend leaving it there. It's decent star material on excuse me. It's decent star material on those 2 loadouts, but actually picking it during a run just sounds not great. Because it's pretty crappy when you put it next to Ember, right? So this is not a card I'd recommend taking, even if you're already in a fire build. However, if you're playing Pyroterra or Gunner, I'd recommend leaving this card in the deck for a while, because it's not terribly offensive, and it's probably one of the better starting cards you're going to get from those loadouts anyway. Pyro Blast. It's okay. It doesn't synergize with anything. It does 150 damage for 2 mana, which is a decent rate. It does a bit of AoE, which is kinda net neutral. And really, this is just the kind of card I would take early on in a run if I'm just looking for something to boost my damage up a bit if I have poor damage. I have no idea why this is purple rarity, because it's not that great and it's not very exciting either. But you can take it or leave it. If you have synergies going on in your deck already, I would stay away from it, because it doesn't really synergize with anything. It's just kind of there. It kind of falls into the same category as stuff like Mini Thunder and Thunderstorm. We'll get to in a second. But yeah, just take it or leave it. If you want the damage, go for it. If you can get by without the damage, then I skip it. Rage. This is a weird one. So it does some AoE stuff, but it's supposed to be a flame payoff. But actually getting enough flames on the field for this to have been worth it is kind of difficult. If you're really, really deep into a flame build, go for it, but it's not the most exciting thing ever. It's another one of those kind of take it or leave it cards. You can, I promise you, if you're deep enough in a flame build where this is actually worth considering, you can get by without it. However, if you're deep in a flame build and you're having some serious damage problems, it might be worth picking up, because let's assume we have 8 tiles on fire. That's going to do 30 times 9, 270 damage in a cross, which is a great rate for 2 mana. That's like approaching Ragnarok levels of damage, so it's decent there. Of course, if you're not in a flame build, stay far away from this. And like I said, if you are in a flame build, it's okay. It's probably the kind of card you take just because, I mean, why not? You're never going to take this outside of a flame build, so the chances you get to use this thing anywhere in the near future are slim to none. So, honestly, I would take it just for the novelty. Ring of Fire. So, Ring of Fire, in my opinion, is a bit worse than Firewall. But when we're comparing things to Firewall, that means they must already be pretty decent to begin with. Because Firewall is a disgustingly powerful card. And I'd say this is just slightly worse than Firewall. I don't know if this quite reaches the level... I don't know if this quite reaches the level of a card that I would take if I'm not running a fire deck, or looking to go that way. But it might. It might. It might also push me towards going. So, really, it's a strong card. Don't get me wrong, it's a strong card. And if you want to take it, go for it. You're not going to be disappointed by it. It's going to pull its weight. But the thing is, I'm just kind of clouded by Firewall. I know Firewall is better than this. And when I make that comparison, it feels like I'm not giving Fire credit. This is a strong card. You can't take this in a non-fire deck. In a fire deck, it's going to work wonders. And it's probably good enough to push you towards considering going down the fire deck route. Next we have Salamander. This is another fire deck payoff. I'd say this one is not quite as good as Combust, but significantly better than Brushfire, and maybe slightly better than Rage. So you can do stuff with this, like combo it with Firewall to guarantee hit people with it. It's nowhere near as good as Firewall, obviously, but it does pull its weight in a fire deck. So you have to already be there, like that's the thing you've probably noticed with a lot of these fire cards. They're only good with other fire cards, except for Fire and kind of agnostic. But this is probably worth taking in a fire deck most of the time. Not running a fire deck is a fire deck. Clearly, don't bother with this because it's not gonna pull its weight. Thunder. Oh boy. This card is probably the simplest spell in the game. It doesn't really do anything impressive. It's just 1 mana for her damage, which is a good rate, but it's kind of a pain to hit sometimes. And it has no synergy potential whatsoever. Saffron starts with this, and I think it's okay there, but I also think it's best we just leave it there. I wouldn't bother taking this card in an actual run. Because one, it's not the best, doesn't synergize with anything, it has no scaling potential whatsoever. And ultimately the card is kind of boring, so it's losing points in all those categories. A card like Explosion, yeah, the card's terrible, but at least it's really cool and exciting. Or like Elle Storm, yeah, the card's not so great, but it's really cool and exciting. It feels good to use. But Thunder is just boring. Not very good. So stay away from this card. Thunderstorm. 6 times 4 is 24. That means on average this is going to do 75 damage to every enemy on the field for 4 mana. That's terrible. This card is bad. Stay away from it. It's... Oh, if it's... Comparing this to Elle Storm. I think with Frost payoffs, Elle Storm's better, but without any Frost payoffs, Thunderstorm's better. They're both not very good, and the ceiling on Elle Storm's much higher. With Thunderstorm, you're not gonna get any payoffs that make this good. It's always just gonna be... It's cooler than Thunder, but it's actually probably much, much less effective because you're getting less damage out of it, and you're paying 4 mana. So the problem is, it's not reliable, doesn't do enough damage on average. Sometimes it's going to do no damage. It costs 4 mana. 4 mana is a lot of mana. Inferno. Oh, by the way, in case it wasn't clear, don't take this card. Inferno. Explosions every your tile for 50 damage. So, every other tile or every other column this can hit for her damage, and then all the other ones it's only gonna hit for 50, assuming stuff stands still. It could hit for more or less if stuff moves around, but I think most of the time this is gonna be 2 mana for 100 damage to everything in those rows, which is an okay rate. It kind of suffers from the same problem as Thunder, where the card's okay, but it doesn't really do enough. It doesn't have anything that you can build off of, or anything that it pays off. Because I can't think of a single artifact in the game, or a single other card in the game, that this synergizes with. Same problem with Thunder and Mini Thunder and Firewall. These cards can all fall in that category. They're just too one-dimensional. They don't have any synergies to work off of, so ultimately what you see is what you get. And what you get here is not terribly impressive. 2 mana for 100 damage, AoE, It's definitely worse than Wildfire Blast. It's already kind of a mediocre card. So honestly, this is the kind of card I just wouldn't... I wouldn't bother with this. It's just not going to do enough for you. And later on, when you have some synergies going on, it's just going to get in the way of those synergies, so stay away from this one. And finally, we have Wildfire, the last Anima card and the last Flame card from it. Somebody's talking about Amalgam because it really ties in well with all the Anima cards we're talking about here, but we'll save that for next video. So, Wildfire, 3 mana, 40 damage, 5 shots. On most of the time, this is just gonna hit everything once. So it's going to do 40 damage and light that tile on fire. Now, let's put this next to PK Fire. If we're looking at it that way, then it's essentially a 3 mana PK Fire, but we're guaranteed to hit with it. It does a little bit more damage, and sometimes it'll hit twice. Is that worth 2 mana? I don't know. 2 mana seems like a lot for this effect, or Man's Soul for this would be pretty solid in my opinion, but 3 mana for this is a bit underwhelming. I'd say it's about on the same power level as Firestorm. Probably slightly worse than PK Fire. Or let's just say it's about on par with PK Fire. The problem with this card is just the mana cost. Like, if this costs 2 mana, it will be great, but it doesn't. It costs 3 mana. 3 mana is too much for this effect. It doesn't do enough damage, especially when you put it next to other fire cards like Firewall. Firewall just makes Wildfire look like a joke. And really, you can put this in your flame deck, but you can also not put this in your flame deck, and your flame deck might be a bit better if you don't, because then you can cast the actually good fire cards like Ring of Fire and Firewall and Combust more often. But if you do decide to put it in, it's not the worst thing ever. So, kind of like with a lot of these other... Noticing this is the kind of thing that I'm saying about a lot of these epics. A lot of these epics, same with Wildfire. If you're already in this strategy, you can take it or leave it, but if you're not in this strategy already, stay away from it. It's not worth it. So, that's gonna conclude my thoughts on all the cards from Anima. Next video, we're gonna go through the Convergence cards, which fortunately are much more exciting, and there's a lot more to talk about with them than there would in the Anima cards. Anima's cards in general are all a bit linear, except a couple of them. And really, for the most part, they're all just apply frost, put down fire, or do mediocre damage in the case of these guys. It's a strong faction, or brand, or focus, or whatever you want to call it. It's strong, but it's just not very exciting. And it mostly combos with itself, whereas with other brands like Double Lift or Convergence or one was not good example, but you get my point. Anima is a largely self-contained focus. Fire cards synergize really good with fire, but they don't play well outside of that. Frost cards synergize really well with frost, but they don't play well outside of that. And then we have these things down here that I don't want to talk about anymore. Alright, so overall, I think as a whole, the Frost cards are very powerful, but that's largely because Frost is a bit overrepresented in the artifact department. The Fire cards are pretty average, except for Firewall, which is fantastic. And these Thunder and stuff down here are all pretty awful, I would say. Right, so that's going to conclude this video. Next time we're going to look at Convergence, and I'll see you guys then.